Hello and welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
And we are the FAIRtax Guys. Again, reminding you that if you have a question or a comment about the FAIRtax, we are available 24/7 through the magic of email. The FAIRtax Guys, gmail.com is our email address. And the FAIRtax Guys on Facebook as well. Appreciate comments and questions and whatever else you might want to put on there. And hopefully we'll have another Facebook Live event here scheduled right quick that we can tell you about. And you can interact with us that way as well. We enjoy that.
Yeah, Facebook Live is a fun event. I mean, because it's live and interactive, like it says live. And we never know what kind of questions we're going to get. We might have a theme in mind of what we want to talk about. But that changes. That goes out the window as soon as the questions start pouring in, which is great. It keeps us on our toes.
Absolutely. It keeps Randy busy as well. We appreciate Randy Fisher coming over to help us with these things behind the scenes. He's online there answering some of these questions as well. So we would encourage you to interact with the FAIRtax Guys, to watch the Facebook Live, to give us an email, and also to join Americans for Fair Taxation. That's part of what we do here. We are trying to grow the grassroots movement because until AFFT, the National Grassroots Organization supporting the fair tax, can show a large membership number, we're not going to have as much clout with the Congress critters as we'd like to have. Yeah,
we have people that go to Washington, I think, every month. Our president, Steve Hayes, goes up at his own expense and talks to people in Congress, congressmen, senators, and their staffs about the fair tax. He is making progress. I know the president and the vice president are very aware of the fair tax, but they need us to be behind them to have a groundswell of grassroots support. So please join the AFFT, and whatever state you're in, please join, your state group. Like here in Florida, our membership is as low as $5 a year. I mean, that's
your membership varies. How many clubs and organizations let you join at whatever financial commitment level that you want to do?
That's right.
They don't say our dues is this and you have to pay it. You can pick whatever level of support you want to put into the project when you join the organization. I don't know of anybody else that does that.
No, we definitely need your support. I mean, we don't have we have a few, but we don't have a lot of deep pocket folks that are backing us up on this. We're hoping to get some, but
we used to. Remember that the FAIRtax, the organization was founded by billionaire businessmen in Houston. Yeah. So there was a lot of money behind this effort to begin with. One of them I know of has passed on, and all of them have just decided they wanted to pass on control of the organization to the grassroots.
Right.
Which in a way is a good thing, but then the big funding kind of dried up as well when that happened.
Yeah. There were like 3 or 4 members, and they were the board of directors, and it was their desire. I know Leo Lindbeck, who was kind of like the leader of the whole group, before he passed away, he expressed a desire to have a grassroots elected board of directors, and that's what we have, including our own Randy Fisher here in Ocala. Yeah. And so with some great people, and our president, Steve Hayes, who's on the Florida board, and he's also on the national board as the president, and he's the one that goes up there every month, up to Washington.
At his own expense, by the way.
Yeah, and presses the flesh and talks to the people in the halls of Congress about the fair tax, and he's done a terrific job. There's a lot more people up there that are knowledgeable about the fair tax now that weren't, say, 2 years ago. So, and that's because of Steve and one of the previous board members who's since retired, Peggy Green Ernst. Okay. Right? She did a great job.
Well, moving along here with this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio, Ron, I must say I will never look at a pencil the same way again after listening to last week's program.
Yeah, but that's why I like that article, because it pointed out as something simple as a pencil. And there's that much involved in bringing it, from its raw materials to the shelf in the store. Holy cow!
All right. Well, I'll tell you what, we want to get into something a little bit different today on FAIRtax Power Radio. Kind of go back to FAIRtax 101 if we can.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting to note that the history of the fair tax was, again, these businessmen out in Houston, Texas. Mm-hmm. They had a business meeting one day and realized they had spent all day in this meeting and had spent about 80% of their time wondering and how the tax code or what the decisions they make are going to have, what kind of tax consequences they would have. So they were more worried about the tax code than they were with how to improve their business.
Yeah.
And somebody was thinking, well, they had the bright idea, and I really mean this literally, a bright idea. Well, why don't we just engage this big group of economists, distinguished economists that really know what they're talking about from some of the major universities in the country, give them a blank sheet of paper and tell them, design me from the ground up the best way to fund the federal government. Now, if you have to take as a given that the federal government must be funded, there are some folks that say any taxation in any form is theft because they're removing your money from you by force. But, if you give the fact that we do have to fund the government, what's the best way to do it? And these guys spent over $20 million researching this thing, and what they came up with was, they didn't call it this at the time, but what they came up with was the FAIRtax.
Yeah, well, they were pretty sure from what I've read that, they're just going to come up with some kind of a modification of the current income tax, and instead their research come up and said, get rid of the income tax, go with the sales tax. Sales tax is much more fair, much easier to collect, and so forth. The income tax is a disaster, and it's getting worse by the day. And that's what they did. So they were pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, and what's interesting is they did not have a name for their creation when they first made it.
No.
And Neil Bortz tells the story that they were explaining their concept to somebody somewhere.
Like a focus group or something?
I think so, a focus group. And somebody piped up and says, well, that's a fair tax. And the name stuck from that on. And so what we want to look at today on FAIRtax Power Radio, what makes the FAIRtax fair? What puts the fair in FAIRtax?
That's a fair question.
Okay, well let's go to work. And my primary number one bullet point on that question, what makes the FAIRtax fair, is that the entire tax code we've got now is just chock full of exemptions, deductions, loopholes, just about every last one of them bought and paid for by a lobbyist for somebody somewhere. And the FAIRtax has none of that. No loopholes, no exemptions, no exceptions. Everyone gets treated the same. You golfers don't get a break that we bowlers don't,
Well, we don't now. That was just a proposal.
That was a proposal that didn't go through.
You're not going to let me forget that, even though I had nothing to do with that. But yeah, Bob is referring to a proposal that golf somehow was considered exercise, and therefore its equipment should be considered exercise equipment and subject to deduction.
But golf is the only game I know where you ride around in an electric cart. Or maybe some of them are gas powered. Who knows?
Yeah.
Anyhow, getting back to the idea.
He took offense to that because somebody proposed the idea of making golf equipment as a deductible expense, and he wanted to know why his bowling equipment wouldn't be a deductible expense.
Yeah, right? Well, bowling equipment doesn't cost as much as golf clubs. I will give you that. But the principle is there that with the income tax, you've got one group of people getting a break that another group of people has to pay for, and whoever has the best lobbyists and whoever has the best tax attorneys and whoever has more money on their side usually, they get the breaks that the rest of us don't, and the FAIRtax gets rid of that.
That's right.
If you're going to have a fair tax, you've got to treat everyone the same. And it doesn't matter the size of your bank account. It doesn't matter where you get your money. It doesn't matter how much you've got. When you buy something, you pay the fair tax at the cash register. End of story. And it doesn't matter who you are or what you're buying. That you cannot come up with a fairer method than that.
And it's so simple too. But that's for another episode. But it is absolutely fair. I mean, it treats everybody, as Bob said, the same way. And yet, even though it treats everybody fairly, it also protects the people who most need protection.
It does, because the FAIRtax has a provision in it that we FAIRtax people call the prebate. Now, that word I don't think you'll find in your Funkin' Wagnalls, but it actually means a rebate given in advance, so they called it a prebate. What it is just actually a standard deduction to the FAIRtax.
Yeah.
As it is with the standard deduction on your income tax, not every dollar you earn is taxed. You get to deduct, so much for personal exemptions. You get to deduct what you spent on medical expenses over and above this, home mortgage, a whole list of things you can deduct from your income tax. You don't really deduct it from the tax. You deduct it from the income that is being taxed. And the FAIRtax does the same thing. They just say, okay, we know what the poverty level is by household size. And we know what the FAIRtax would be on your spending up to that level. But rather than try to keep track of how much everybody spends and what they spend it on, they say, all right, we'll just assume that everybody's going to spend up to the poverty level, and we will give them back. We will rebate to them the tax they paid on that spending up to the poverty level. And what that does is a couple of things. Of course, it completely untaxes those who spend right at or below the poverty level.
Right.
The folks on the lower end of the economic scale, they will pay it at the register, but they get it back in the prebate, so their out-of-pocket tax rate for the poor under the fair tax is zero. Yep. And it can be negative if you actually spend less than the consumption allowance.
If you're very frugal.
Your prebate is greater than what you will pay at the cash register, and you put money in your pocket with a fair tax. And again, it's mathematically impossible. Once you pass that threshold and your spending rises above the poverty level for your household size, the more you spend, the more you take out of your own pocket to pay the fair tax. Period. You hear a lot of these politicians screaming about, this group doesn't pay their fair share and everybody's avoiding their fair share. It is mathematically impossible. They took the Warren Buffett thing, where his secretary pays a higher tax rate than Warren Buffett, one of the richest guys in the world, pays. And they say, that's wrong. Says, well, under the fair tax, it's mathematically impossible for that to happen unless the secretary spends more than Warren Buffett does. Because your out-of-pocket tax rate rises proportionally as your spending rises. So it is fair. Everyone pays their fair share according to how much they spend.
So, when we're working a booth outdoor at some event, well, outdoor or indoor, and people are passing by and they might hear about the fair tax for the first time, and you explain that it's a consumption tax, sales tax. Sometimes, if people are sharp, the first thing they'll say is, "Oh, it's a sales tax. That's regressive." Yeah, a normal sales tax is regressive. That means that it hurts the poor, those that are just getting by, more than it hurts the wealthy. And it takes a bigger chunk out of what they earn than people who earn a lot of money. That's what they mean by regressive. And this prebate thing removes that totally. Just removes the regressive nature of the sales tax and turns it right around and actually makes it progressive. So the people who are just getting by, they're earning just enough to feed their families and put clothes on their back and provide shelter. They're just getting by. Those folks are rendered tax-free, because if they're just getting by, why should they be burdened with this, excessive tax? Now, and then the people who have a lot of means, they have a lot of income and are spending more, well, the more they spend, the more they'll pay. And these folks that are at that just struggling by, when the economy improves, because the fair tax will improve the economy, and they get a raise in pay and they start doing better, financially, well, when they start spending above the poverty level, then they too will pay too. But the fair tax protects the people that most need protection.
That it does. And another thing it does, it gets rid of the most regressive taxes on the planet.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people don't think of this, but we have hit on this on FTPR a time or two. The payroll taxes that come out of your paycheck to support Social Security and Medicare, you don't get that back. I mean, you could, if your income is low enough and you filed your tax return at the end of the year, it's possible that your tax liability is zero and everything that was withheld from you over the course of the year is given back to you. You don't get that back. Social Security and Medicare is a tax on the poor, and you pay it regardless, and it's the same percentage regardless of how big your paycheck is. So you talk about something that's regressive, that's taking a bigger chunk out of the poor's purchasing power than the rich. Those payroll taxes that support Social Security and Medicare are at the top of the list. Those taxes go away, again, for the 150th time. The programs do not. The fair tax specifically funds those two programs. It changes the funding model, so they are actually put on a better financial footing than they are now. But the fair tax gets rid of those regressive taxes, so that's fair. It is.
So that leads us to something else. All right, without the payroll tax and without the income tax deductions, then you get your whole paycheck. And what that means is that your family comes first. You get your whole paycheck to take home and take care of your family before you give any money to Uncle Sam. That's the way it should be. What we have now is upside down. This withholding thing that started back in the 40s is the most insidious thing. All right, it puts the government ahead of your family. It puts the government as a higher priority than you providing for your family. That's not the way it should be. The fair tax straightens that out because no income tax, no payroll tax. That means you get your whole paycheck. You can better provide for your family. And that is fair, all right? It's fair to be able to provide for your family.
Now, another major point in what puts the fair in fair tax is that you cannot have a system and call it fair if some people are paying and some people are evading.
Yeah.
Oh, mercy. You get these groups of people, the underground economy comes to mind. Those people are not paying federal income taxes. I guarantee that drug dealers are not reporting to the IRS the money that they make, but they're buying yachts, they're buying Porsches, they're buying stuff like that. So when you extend the tax base out to everybody so that there aren't these huge pockets of people that get away legally with paying nothing. I guess it's if you're doing that, that's illegal. If you're, but there is some tax avoidance. You know, all these loopholes and exemptions we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Let certain people legally reduce their income. But we've got people out there now that are just illegally. They're cheating the system.
Yeah.
They're not reporting their income. They're underreporting their income. They are claiming more deductions than they're entitled to. The system's rotten. It's not fair because some people take advantage of it, and others that. The honest taxpayers have to make up the difference.
Yeah.
With the fair tax, again, the entire income tax goes away. The tax base is extended to everybody. Everybody's got some skin in the game, and that's fair.
It's absolutely fair. And this tax evasion that Bob is talking about, this is a big deal. It's almost $700 billion for this year alone. There was a study that the AFFT recently commissioned and finished a few months ago. And Dr. Sabula, I think that is pronounced, did this research. He's an expert on evasion, so he updated his figures. Yeah, it's approaching $700 billion with a B. $700 billion a year that those of us who are paying our taxes are making up for those people who are illegally evading the taxes, all right? They are illegally evading taxes. Either they're under-reporting their income or over-reporting their deductions or both, or they're just not reporting anything. And that problem is going to get worse, and it's going to cause the income tax to collapse. So is Congress going to do something about this before it becomes a crisis? We hope so.
All right. Ron. If you have this massive sales tax on everything, it's going to create this huge black market.
Yeah, right.
Wrong.
Yeah. So, where are you going to go for a black market to get your groceries? When you want groceries, you want to go to a reputable store, and get groceries that are safe.
And you're talking about the fairness aspect of it, the evasion. Research has shown that a huge percentage of the retail sales that take place in this country happen in a relatively small world. Your big box retailers like Walmart and Target and Amazon and
Sears,
Sears. They're going to, but a lot of folks. And those big companies are not going to risk. It takes two people to evade a sales tax. The person who doesn't want to pay it and the retailer that'll let them get away with it. So the evasion problem goes away with the fair tax. Almost entirely disappears. I imagine there'll still be a little bit, but not a whole lot. Not nearly as much. Because the consumption tax is much harder to evade.
Yeah.
So not nearly as many people are cheating the system.
Yeah,
so it's fair to everyone.
Try to go into Walmart and buy a big screen TV and tell them you don't want to pay the sales tax and see what happens.
You will be escorted back to the electronics department where you will put the little box back in the shelf.
Yep. All right, here's another one. You decide your level of taxation by your spending habits. Now, what do we mean by that, and why is that fair? You decide your level of taxation by your spending habits. Okay, let's say that it's time for your family to buy another car. You have a number of choices. One, if you buy a used car, there's no fair tax on that.
Correct.
That's another thing that's fair about the fair tax. The used product was taxed under the fair tax once and will not be taxed again. Okay, so if you choose to buy a used car, no fair tax. There's no more double dipping. But let's say that, you'd really like to get a new car. Okay, what kind of new car? Do you want to get a low-end, a more affordable vehicle?
I want a Lamborghini.
Or do you want to buy a Lamborghini? Yeah. Do you want to buy a Chevy or a Cadillac? Do you want to buy a Ford or a Lincoln? That's up to you, what your family can afford and what you really want to do. So your spending habits determine your level of taxation, not some masterminds in Washington.
And if your income is such that you can buy a Lamborghini, you're welcome to get it. But
Go
you
for
will
it.
pay a heck of a lot more fair tax on that than you will on a Chevy or a Ford.
Yes, and we encourage you to do that. So you can decide your level of taxation by your spending habits under the fair tax. You don't have that now. You don't have a choice. You have the masterminds in Washington telling you what you're going to pay in taxes. Depend. And the thing is, right now, if you work hard, let's say you work a regular job, 9 to 5, and then on the weekends you have another job or something, and your income goes up, you get hammered even more. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't happen under the fair tax either.
I like the way that the fair tax encourages the consumption of used goods. The environmental people would like that.
That's right.
People who want to save the planet, which should be everybody on the planet, because we all have to live here,
Yeah,
but
that's
that
right.
Works. A couple other things we want to get into as the time is scooting on around us. This is one of the most insidious things that Congress does, and that is that they use the tax code to wage class warfare.
Oh, they do.
Not going to happen with a fair tax.
Nope.
So if you are one of the people who are getting unfavorable treatment because you are in a class on which the war has been declared, they're out to get you.
Yeah, that's right.
Then you should be all for the fair tax, because then the government can no longer use the tax code for this class warfare purpose.
Yeah, you've heard it on TV. Oh, the rich need to pay more.
They will under the fair tax, I guarantee you.
Yeah, they will. Because the current tax code, the tax rate is higher for higher incomes, okay? So they try to make it progressive by having a higher tax rate at the higher incomes. But then, because half of the people in Congress are millionaires, there's a lot of loopholes in there. So, technically they have a higher rate, but they also have a higher incidence of reducing their tax burden via the legal loopholes. That's called tax avoidance, legal tax avoidance, put in there by Congress people to help Congress people. So, but with the fair tax, all that nonsense goes away. You spend a little, you pay a little. You spend a lot, you pay a lot. It's that simple. And Congress, and the fair tax is so simple. The only thing Congress can do, the only thing they're able to do is to change the rate. So let's say there was a case of a national emergency or something and they had to raise some more money. Yeah, they could raise it from 23 to 24%. But then they would affect everybody. They can't say, well, just this group is going to do 24% and this group is going to... No, the fair tax is simple. One rate for everybody. So no more class warfare via the tax code. All right, Congress, keep your grubby little paws off of our tax code.
And no more, this is related to that, no more government picking winners and losers in private industry. Where a particular segment of a particular industry gets a tax break or a tax incentive that somebody else doesn't get. Now that is the epitome definition of unfair. Somebody gets something that somebody else doesn't get.
Yeah. Do you folks need to be told by folks in Congress what kind of light bulbs to buy?
No.
Or which toilets to buy? Okay. Do we really need the masterminds in Congress making those decisions for us? No. Now let's have the fair tax in which everybody's treated the same, and Congress cannot play the tax code to favor their political friends and harm their political enemies. All right? Let's take the tax code out of their hands. They still have control over how the money is spent, because the tax code is a revenue issue. It is not a spending issue. And certainly there are some issues with the way they spend money, but this is a show about the tax code, about the fair tax, all right?
Okay, well, let's re-hit some of the major bullet points here. What makes the FAIRtax fair? No exemptions, no loopholes, no deductions. Everyone is treated the same. Everyone gets the prebate so that they don't pay taxes on the spending that they have to do to maintain their basic necessity, standard of living.
Yep.
Industry, the government can no longer play favorites within an industry, can no longer, try to do class warfare stuff.
Yep.
It's just such a good idea that it's so fair where you treat everybody, and the golfers don't get a break that the bowlers don't.
And your family comes first.
Absolutely.
Your family comes first with the fair tax.
What do you do if you would like to help make this a reality?
Yeah, well...
That's a really hard question, Ron. Have at it.
There's this organization called the Americans for Fair Taxation. That's our national group. And they have two good websites. One is fairtax.org, and you can go there and become a member, and please help them financially. The other one, if you want to learn more about the fair tax, on your own by studying this website, bigsolution.org. Big solution singular, bigsolution.org. And they have several buttons like, connect, contribute, support, and so forth, and build. And they have all kinds of information there on what the tax code is, what it does, how it helps people. So help out these folks. We need a groundswell support of grassroots people showing Congress that there are millions of people who really want this and they need to pay attention.
Yeah, and this is not some bloated organization that has a huge administrative overhead. Everybody that works for AFFT is a volunteer.
Same with, as far as I know, all the state organizations are the same way too.
So anything and everything that you contribute towards the cause is going to go towards the cause and not lining somebody's pocket. I mean, we mentioned earlier that the president of AFFT, Steve Hayes, who lives right here in Ocala, or not in Ocala, in Florida, he goes up to Washington out of his own pocket.
Yeah.
To press the flesh and talk to Congress people about that. So we are not paying, stuff like that. We do need your help to keep the organization going, and you can do that at bigsolution.org.
Yep. So let's see. What else? If you want to learn more about, just about any legislation, but certainly the fair tax also, PopVox, POPVOX, great website in which you can voice your opinions not only about the fair tax, but any bill in Congress that you feel passionate about. You can look it up, and you can weigh in, pro or con and so forth, and your comments do go to your congressman and your two senators. So PopVox is a good way to weigh in on the fair tax and other legislation.
Yeah, I remember we talked to Congressman Yoho here in Florida 3. And he says, of course, the Congress people themselves have got way too much going on to be paying attention. But they do have, every last one of them has staff whose only purpose is to, compile this feedback. If you make a comment on PopVox, it is guaranteed that somebody in your Congress or representative's office is going to see that. And it will have an effect. The more comments there are on a given issue, the greater effect it'll be.
That's right.
But go out there and check it out, because they are watching. The Congress people are watching PopVox.
And PopVox does a great job of not only listing each proposal, but how it's doing in their district, how people are weighing in on it in their district. So it's a very valuable tool for congressmen and senators.
So again, we do invite you to get in touch with us. Our email address, thefairtaxguys@gmail.com. Go check us out on Facebook as well. Grab one of our Facebook Live. If you can't watch it live, you can go back and watch the video after the fact. And we certainly appreciate all of the feedback that we get from our vast worldwide audience here. We got people listening in India and Japan and stuff like that now, we have discovered. But that's going to wrap it up for this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
The FAIRtax Guys reminding you that the fair tax is America's big solution, and once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
Fair tax is coming.